So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. On behalf of the World Forum for Ethics in Business, we welcome you to the biggest global summit of the year on changing paradigms in a pandemic world, how to regain trust. The World Forum for Ethics in Business is a public interest foundation registered in Belgium. The mandate of the forum includes all manner of pursuing and establishing the indispensable ethical foundations of business and sports in a globalized world. Today, and on the occasion of the World Health Day, the World Forum for Ethics in Business and Sports has invited leading experts like yourselves to put into perspective the current ethical and other implications and consequences of COVID-19. Our session here is called The Role of Media During and After COVID-19. During the course of the session, I ask all viewers to tweet, like, and ask your questions on the YouTube, Facebook chat channels of the World Forum, and we try to include your questions into the panel. My name is Peter Marty, owner of a communication group in Switzerland, Europe. Our companies are active globally for analog and digital solutions, mainly active in the social media business. Let me introduce to you our panelists. I'm more than happy to have such a wonderful panel on our virtual stage this afternoon. So welcome Mr. Kurt Zimmermann, journalist from Switzerland, former chief editor of Sonntagszeitung, and actually living since a couple of years in Budapest, Hungary. Then we will have on the panel Mr. Nurj Diva, actually sitting in Colombo, former MEP board member, then publisher of Commonwealth Union News website. And finally, Lord Marland of Odstock, former Trade Minister UK, Chairman of the Commonwealth Enterprises and Investment Council. Welcome, gentlemen. I would like to that you probably quickly introduce yourself, who you are and what is your relationship to the topics of this afternoon. And let me start in Budapest, Hungary, with Kurt Zimmermann. And probably, Kurt, you can quickly introduce yourself.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kurt Zimmermann. I'm Swiss. I'm in the media business for about 40 years. I started as a journalist and I was editor-in-chief and publisher of Swiss Sunday newspapers and news magazines. Then I changed to the more commercial side of the business. I was, for many years, I was member of the executive board of the biggest media company in Switzerland, later president of a TV channel in Switzerland. Then I started my own business and bought a publishing company in the north of Italy. I managed it for several years and I sold it 3 years ago. Since then, I'm back to my journalistic roots. Today, I'm a weekly columnist for the leading news magazine in Switzerland, and I'm a columnist also for a German-speaking business magazine. That's it.
I'm actually today living in Budapest. Thank you very much. Let's move to Colombo.
I'm Nurj Diva. For 30 years, I was an elected politician in 2 different parliaments. First the British Parliament and then the European Parliament. And 16 years ago, I remember very vividly having a conversation with Ravi, Shankar and all the now members of the board, and we started the World Forum for Ethics in Business in the European Parliament so many 16 years ago. It's now grown into a very massive global organization. I'm also having translated from being a politician, I'm now a publisher of the Commonwealth-wide media platform, the Commonwealth Union, and the chairman of it is sitting here next to me, making sure I say the right thing. And I am very pleased to be in the media world only for a year or so, but it has been a very rewarding experience to try and reach out to people with the proper news and to balance the news impartially.
Thank you very much. Let's move to London, to Mr. Lord Morland of Odstock.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. My name is Jonathan Marland. I'm currently chairman of the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council, which promotes and brings together and facilitates trade and business throughout the 54 countries of the Commonwealth world, which is about a third of the world's population. I was formerly a businessman, and in my business interests, in fact, indeed, I do own a publishing business which publishes the greatest cricket magazine ever produced, which is called Wisden Cricketer. But that, I'm afraid, is the extent of my publishing interests. I have, of course, in my work as Minister for Trade, as was earlier referenced, and my current role in the Commonwealth, travelled widely the world dealing with media, covering interviews, etc., across the world, and have very good relationships and knowledge of British media over here at the highest level. So I'm delighted to be joining this organisation. And a word about Commonwealth Union, which Nerj has rather underplayed, I think. It's this fantastic online organ that has just started recently that is now attracting so many people to its excellent content, and something that's really needed in the Commonwealth world.
Great, and thank you. I'm really delighted to have such a powerful panel here. I'm really delighted to have you all here. Thank you very much. And it seems to be so close, even if you meet virtually in different parts of the world. So it's a great challenge for all of us. Let's go into the subject, and the title of this breakout session is clear: the role of media during and after COVID. And this leads me to my first question. I would like to ask my first question to Kurt Zimmermann. What was for you the most surprising effect in the media coverage of COVID-19 since 12 months now?
Well, the most surprising observation during COVID was, for me, the rebirth of nationalism in the media. See, nationalism was really the trend in the media during the last 12 months. That's surprising, because for years and years, the media mainstream told us that nationalistic thinking was a construct from yesterday. They said us, we are not Swiss anymore, we are not Germans anymore, we are Europeans, or even better, we are citizens of the world. And then Corona arrived, and what happened? We experienced 2 waves of unexpected and fierce nationalism in the media. The first wave was the international competition of infection rates and death rates. It was some kind of a challenge. Who was leading and who was struggling in the race was the daily question in the media. The media presented us the daily comparison in this special Champions League of disease. 150 deaths in Japan, we in South Korea are better. 100,000 infections in the US under Trump, we in Germany under Merkel are better. Yeah, there were some flag ceremonies and cannon salutes in the media when they wrote about COVID. I think the COVID numbers become a substitute of political superiority of a nation or political inferiority of a country. As far as I know, the most extreme case of this new nationalism was transported by the German media. it was a lot about, had a lot to do with Chancellor Angela Merkel. I remember a headline in German newspapers, Merkel can crisis. Or another headline, Merkel and we are envied by the rest of the world. Of course, when the numbers in Britain went up, the German media exactly knew that this was the inevitable result of the Brexit and the so-called Brexit clown, Boris Johnson. Then something happened. The numbers in Germany suddenly were on a higher level than otherwise, and higher than in the US and in Great Britain. It was hard to swallow for the German journalists. It was like the defeat against England in Wembley, 1966. A few weeks ago then, the second wave of nationalism started. This time it began the Champions League of vaccinations. It was the same pattern in the media, nation against nation. This time, the losers from before turned into winners. Britain went largely in front. The US were among the leaders as well. The national media clapped their hands in triumph. Boris Johnson was a hero, even in the British left-wing media, and Joe Biden got some applause even from Fox News. Back to Germany. Germany was one of the last places in those vaccination Olympic Games. Now the German media went wild. They were not furious that people were dying because of the lack of vaccines. No, they were furious because they were hurt in their nationalistic pride. I didn't like what I've seen in the media during the last few months, but I think, well, in June, the European Football Championship will start. Let's hope COVID will be over. Until then, I think there are better opportunities for nationalism in the media than pandemics.
Oh, this is a pretty clear statement, which leads me to a further question to you before we switch to the other two. During the pandemic, you used to live in Switzerland and in Hungary. Switzerland has free media. In Hungary, press freedom is rather under pressure. And under these conditions, how did the media react in the two countries to the government measures and decisions during the pandemic? Are there similarities or was it completely different? You're saying that the Swiss media didn't deliver basically a good job during COVID.
Well, Peter, if I compare the media in Hungary and the media in Switzerland, my rating probably will surprise you. The media in Hungary were a lot more critical of the government than the Swiss media. The criticism against Prime Minister Viktor Orban was very aggressive in the media here. You know, I live in Hungary now for 3 years or so, and there is a lot of misinterpretation about the media in Hungary. Fact is, most of the big media companies are critical of Orban. RTL Group, the biggest TV channel, is government critical. Népszava, the biggest traditional newspapers, hates Orban. The biggest tabloid, Blick, is not friendly with Orban. HVG, the biggest news magazine, is government critical. Two or three of the biggest online sites are against Orban. Orban has a problem with the media, but he has the problem only in Budapest. That's why Orban and his party Fidesz, they lost the elections in Budapest 18 months ago. Budapest now is left green. The mayor is left, like in other big cities, like in Berlin, in London, or in Zurich. The countryside is under control of Orban. That's where he controls all the smaller regional newspapers, and that's important because that's where the voters are. So the big media in Hungary, they put a lot of pressure on Orban, and they were right. The death rate in Hungary is among the highest in the world, a consequence of the not very well established health system. Orban reacted on the press critics, and he started a huge vaccination program. 25% of the 10 million Hungarians today are vaccinated. But we have to say it was the merit of the critical Hungarian journalists. Switzerland, on the other hand, saw a very different story. Here, the media were hands-on. Many journalists who before were proud to be very critical of their political system suddenly became loyal followers and even some kind of PR agents of their government. It was a cultural shift in the behavior of the journalists in Switzerland. They felt some kind of a patriotic responsibility. I don't like it when media and politicians go hand in hand. And the consequence in Switzerland was the following. The politicians became very sure what they were doing. The lockdowns were very strong in Switzerland, and the media didn't criticize it anymore. So the balance of power was not working in Switzerland.
This was a rather, how should I say, hot political statement. So we are in the middle of politics, and I'm happy to switch to London to Jonathan. Kurt said that Boris Johnson, for instance, changed from the Brexit clown to the Brexit hero. How the media reacted in UK during this phase? Jonathan?
Can you hear me?
Here we are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, the media in the UK, as with many other countries, has been compromised because they are the engine of where the government is delivering its message. And there has been fear, concern, all the messaging that the government has wanted to employ has been done through the media. And at the same time, they've also used the media through advertising, which they paid for, to deliver that message. So the media is almost certainly compromised in everything it does. I think the analysis is that most of the media, in particular the BBC, have focused on what I would call complaining Britain rather than encouraging Britain. So they've taken small stories, hardship and suffering of them as if they were representative of the national issue. They've enjoyed the pain that the country has been going through, as I think Kurt is saying pretty much in his very, very brilliant message he's just given. They've also challenged the government's figures by using lots of different experts who are no more expert than the government's experts themselves. So there's been this sort of confused messaging that's been coming out to the general public. The government saying one thing, then a bunch of experts lining up and saying something else. And they haven't really challenged those experts as aggressively as they perhaps could have done. So I think a lot of people got turned off from watching the media or listening to the story after the incredibly compelling, frightening start to this whole lockdown and campaign that the government demonstrated through their statistics and through the messaging that they carried out. The real key, however, for the media is how they respond once the pandemic's over, because it will be digging up the drains who are awarded contracts. That's already started over in the UK. Were they cronies of Boris? Were they awarded properly and through the right process? Of course, inevitably they won't have been, because so many of these contracts had to be awarded so quickly because we didn't have enough PPE, we didn't have enough hospital space. There'll be huge question marks to why we built what they called the Nightingale hospitals for the for the potential patients that were going to fill them, which never were filled. The excess of PPE that was ordered, the amount of provisions that were made in government buildings to provide for the sort of warlike position that we would find ourselves in. And then, of course, there will be the examination of the deaths themselves. In our country, under 130,000 people so far out of a 65 million population. And of course, those deaths are horrendous. And because we tend to do this in Britain, we over-reported our statistics, taking in people who had other diseases, but COVID in the end tragically killed them. So there will be a massive inquiry after this event. Boris Johnson is enjoying, to come back to your original question, Peter, Boris Johnson is enjoying a moment in the sun, and he should enjoy it, because most prime ministers rarely have times of great pleasure. And he himself has had the most horrendous, some of it self-inflicted time. He's had to deal with Brexit. He's had to have non-stop elections. He has had a week's holiday in something like 18 months. He's had COVID very badly himself and was on a ventilator, and has had throughout it actually huge sympathy and support for the way that he's managed the process. Yeah. And I think, and I hope, Kurt, you would agree, and those of you who are on this call, that he hasn't actually been grandstanding about how far we've been ahead in vaccines. It is, the statistic has delivered. They've very, very cutely gone and ordered loads of them from every possible place that has. But I don't think he's been grandstanding. And Merkel and Macron have themselves been accusing the UK of foul tactics, and obviously the head of the Commission herself has been accusing the UK of foul tactics, when in fact these accusations were spurious. So I hope he hasn't been grandstanding. I know he's going to enjoy this, and is enjoying this moment in the sun, despite his incredible fatigue. And he looks terrible, by the way. Sorry, long-winded answer to your excellent question, Peter.
Oh, thank you very much. Now we have Hungary, we have Switzerland, we have London. Let's move to Colombo and probably to a wider area, the Commonwealth. Nurse, how do you think? What was the most surprising effect for you in the media coverage on a global perspective?
There were two aspects, Marty. Sitting here doing Commonwealth media, was looking at what was happening in the Commonwealth, and being a British politician, I was looking at what was happening back home in my home country of Britain and what was going on. And I would be extremely disappointed to say that what is a global issue, a global pandemic, turned into a national competition. And I don't know how, in this day and age of globalization, of mass media, our spirit and our souls were so small to turn what is a global issue into a national competition. And it really made me very, very troubled about it. For example, even the national competition got divided into political competition between the left and the right, particularly in Britain. I want to show you something. If you look at this screen behind me, this is the same newspaper, two newspapers reporting the same story. One rejoicing that the freedoms are being given, and the other complaining that there were restrictions of freedom. Now, in this issue, what is at hand is the greatest good of the greatest number, balanced against what is the indivisible rights of freedom of the individual. The battle is between that, how to deliver the greatest good of the greatest number without damaging individual freedom. Now, this is a global issue, but you turned it into a competition, in a horrible way of politicizing an issue that should never have been politicized. It's a health issue. And it is not something we created deliberately. It was an accident or whatever, but it happened to all of us. And it is a global issue. Now, if you look at the way the Commonwealth has been reporting it, it's quite different, actually. It has brought countries together. Some countries in the Commonwealth have brought themselves together and sympathized with their neighbors. In Sri Lanka, the government has been brilliant. Only less than 1,000 people have died in a country of 23 million. And there are very few patients going into hospital now. And so, but they are not beating their drums and saying, hey, look what we have done. And look at what silly old another country next to us is doing. That didn't happen. And they came together in a more human way to treat each other and help each other with vaccines, donations, money, support, and so on.
Sorry to interrupt you, but coming back to the media question, you know, the role of the media here, or the role of the journalists, how did the pandemic change the role of the journalists? And this is probably a question for Kurt, because he is a journalist. And did they become more reliable, the journalists, or did they lost their whole trust and confidence? What do you think happened? Or maybe you can even answer from your own experience. What happened to you personally?
Well, I can give you an answer. I asked me the same question a few weeks ago. Last year, I wrote 52 columns for the news magazine I'm working for. 32 of them, nearly 2/3, had to do with COVID. COVID in politics, COVID in economics, COVID in the media. And the rest had to do with Donald Trump. Well, last year, there were at least 2 big topics. This year, there is only 1 topic anymore. You see, I know journalists today who write only about Corona, and this for months. In psychiatric terms, the focus on one single item is called an obsession. That's what happened to a lot of journalists. Many in the media business are obsessed with the pandemic. The obsession becomes worse because most of the journalists are not working on the former editorial floors anymore or in the former newsrooms anymore. The offices are closed. They sit at home alone in the so-called home office. That's what has changed journalism. Imagine, Peter, you're a journalist. You sit alone at home week after week. You have no external contacts. You think about the pandemic all the time. You write about it day after day. You write about nothing else anymore. You are physically isolated and mentally focused on the one overwhelming issue, the virus. I think you will get quite crazy. And the result of all this craziness, I think you can read it daily in your newspaper.
It's a clear statement regarding the actual feeling of journalists and also the way how you do their job. Now, probably not all journalists are only COVID journalists alone. They probably also write about some different issues which happened in the world. My question to Jonathan is, was the media critical enough at the beginning, 12 months ago, in summer last year, and today, to what the government and the health ministers decided and published? Did the media really was critical, or did they just print it and show on TV what the government was saying? You're in mute.
Sorry, they keep muting me and unmuting me.
That's good.
Okay.
Good.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. As I said to you earlier, I mean, in my view, they've been compromised. Well, they inevitably have been compromised. They were totally confused at how to respond to this pandemic, as indeed was the government. As Kurt said, Boris Johnson and the government didn't know how to respond to this particular war. We had all the science, as did America, but neither America or the UK knew how to turn that science into a practical solution until they realized, and I was often telling the Prime Minister, that he had to get people who knew how to run businesses to deliver the program, rather than thinking they, as ministers and civil servants, had the skill to in this warlike situation which they found themselves. And so I think that confusion created confusion within the media. And of course, it depended on where you were from in the media. If you were a right-wing press, you would go quite easy on the government, and if you were left-wing, you'd go very hard on the government. I think that it does bear scrutiny. I think most people got very turned off by the way that the media delivered this message. They were turned on by the chilling story that came out every day from Number 10 of more deaths, etc., etc. That was so compelling and so frightening and so sad for so many people. But outside of that, I think the media played a pretty inadequate delivery of a contrary message or a challenging message. It was all too microscopic rather than big picture. And just picking up on the Brexit thing, of course, nothing has given the media more pleasure in this country than Ursula von der Leyen's attitude and Macron and Merkel's attitude to the UK over this. And if ever people thought Brexit was a bad idea, the majority of the people now are beginning to think it's a good idea. And that has been promoted largely by the media. Mm-hmm. So these are the issues that are manifesting itself. And unlike Kurt, we've had the big issues of, obviously we've had the issue of Trump, we've had the big issue of Brexit running alongside COVID, rightly or wrongly.
Just a next question to you. How were the numbers and statistics dealt with in the United Kingdom by the media? Because I was always astonished here in Central Europe that the governments were always talking about diseases, but they didn't make the differentiation between the diseases with or of COVID, which is a big difference. Nobody did this differentiation, and I asked myself why.
Yeah. Well, can you hear me? Sorry, they keep muting me now. Yeah, I can. I think this is a very, very good question, Peter. The statistics were delivered as is by the government on a very precise way when they started happening. So you would get the amount of people who caught the disease every day and the amount of people who died from it every day. They, of course, were not, as I referenced earlier in the show, that they were not split up into people who died as a result of having cancer, but then COVID, for example, pushing them on. So our statistics arguably look far worse than the pure COVID statistics. I think the other thing is that in the initial phases, we had the government scientific experts suggesting that 500,000 people would die from COVID. We had a man called Neil Ferguson, who had been scientific advisor over another pandemic which we had, which was mad cow's disease, where he predicted huge amount of deaths, and indeed on this time on this particular thing. So the mixed messages that came out inevitably were delivered by the media, which was confusing and even more frightening the prospect than they turned out to be. And thank God didn't transpire. So you had one scientist saying this, another scientist saying another, and it was very confusing for the media to be able to, focus its message, as indeed no doubt was for the government.
Okay, let's switch to Colombo. Now you were pretty lucky in Sri Lanka that you didn't have too many deaths and infections in your country compared to other countries in the world. What was, in your opinion, the commercial effect of COVID on the media industry? Do you think media profited a lot from COVID, even in a country where practically no deaths or just not too many deaths and infections are taking place? Do you think the media profited from this hype? Let's call it hype.
I think the media profited from COVID globally, not only the printed and television media, but all the other media platforms, from Twitter accounts to social media to Instagrams and all these stuff. A lot of it with fake news. And you had a whole bunch of people writing rubbish to get hits, so that advertisements and advertisements could be sold. So there was morally very unethical things going on about how people were making money or not making money, as the case may be, from reporting the truth or the false stories in the media. And because of the way the social media adverts are funded, by clicks per click and per hit, the more sensational you are, the more complicatedly sensational you are, the more sticky, as they call it, the story is, the more you earn. Mm-hmm. And so why would you say today we had a very few deaths and everything is all right, when you could say something else and get more clicks or more whatever? And in parts of the Commonwealth, I must say that doesn't happen. There has been a great deal of consciousness about the implications of bad reporting. I think a lot of Commonwealth countries have gone through terrible pandemics, AIDS problems, and malaria problems, and all sorts of other problems. So that when this came along, they knew how to handle it and not sensationalize it or make it something that they could capitalize on to make money. So if you examine the Commonwealth media as such, it was pretty sober.
Yeah.
And even in India, even in India today, where India is going through a very, very bad patch this last few days, the media is sober about it and balanced.
Good. Let's switch quickly to Kurt. Kurt, what do you think? Did the media industry profited financially from COVID-19, or in terms of readership or viewership?
Well, it was a glory and a disaster at the same time. On one side, COVID created records for the media sector. The number and the audience went through the ceiling. COVID produced a large increase of readers, TV spectators, and online users. The number of subscriptions was growing faster than ever. But financially, this boom so far only partially paid off. The media companies often tried to overuse this unique opportunity to get new clients. So they often offered their subscription at discounted prices. For instance, I bought a new New York Times subscriptions during COVID. It cost me $5 for 1 year. More important for the bottom line of the industry was the decrease of the ad market. The pandemic caused a considerable drop in advertising spending. And that was the hardest hit. As advertising spending in countries like Germany and France were down by more than 10%. COVID had a greater impact on the advertising market than the financial crisis in 2008. And that's astonishing. And the first quarter data we just got showed that the year-on-year revenue, even in China, was down 15%. I think especially hard-hit was the newspaper industry. For some newspapers, the losses in the advertising market were up to 30%. So COVID was some kind of a storm for the media industry, but on the same time, it produced a fundamental learning process, especially for the newspaper industry. The learning was some kind of a rollback. The industry learned on readers, you can rely, on advertisers, you can't. And that will be the strategy for the future.
Okay, do you believe that media publishing houses got the funds from the government or benefits or received money, just that they, as a benefit for informing properly what the government wants to have been informed? What do you think? What is your opinion about this?
Yes, of course they did.
You're talking now about what? You're talking about now Europe or Hungary or Switzerland? Or?
No, in most of the European countries, there was a money flow from the government treasury in the pockets of the publishers. So the taxpayers had to compensate the losses of the publishing companies. There were about 2 or 3 factors. Just the first point is most governments carried out huge advertising campaigns around Corona.
Yeah.
Health instruction, protection measures, testing and vaccination informations. It was easy for the government to sideline the media which were too critical of the government and to reward the ones that were loyal followers or even PR agents of the government. Additionally, in countries like Switzerland, Austria, Germany, the government supported the media industry with indirect and direct payments. Indirect support was, for instance, a huge reduction of the prices for the newspaper delivery or tax reductions. Direct payments were, for example, subsidies for online infrastructure and online publishing. In Germany, it was more than 200 million, which was spent like that. It was quite funny because the subsidies on the table, when there are subsidies on the table, there is always an immediate fight who will get the biggest piece of the cake. Exactly that happened. It was.
Jonathan, did it happen this as well in the UK? Do you know that the government really distributed money, not just for advertising, because of information about COVID, but also money beside on the sideline?
Well, I mean, the government, Kurt has enunciated this far better than I could ever begin to, and is spot on. You know, the government had this huge deliberate advertising campaign, which was kept the media going. And of course, they offered furlough and business rates relief to the companies as they did to other companies. Furlough was this scheme that we had in the UK, government paying 80% of salaries of staff who were laid off. So, I mean, the only thing I would add to what Kurt has said is that the newspaper industry has gone through what every single business has gone through, really, which is this turbocharging of its resetting. Businesses have had to cope in a totally different way of working, a totally different way of producing their product. and you know this has forced the pace so much quicker with the use of technology than anyone was ever anticipating. But I think the media, having initially failed to grasp the desire for content by doing things, as Kurt said, of offering their excellent coverage at very reduced prices. What it has done is it's transformed a bulk of their readership to an online readership, which is where they wanted to go, with a paywall, and over a period of time they will increase that paywall and regain their funds. But I don't think it's been an indecent display by government to support the media. I think it's been perfectly reasonable, perfectly acceptable. They have to get their message out. The only way they could get their message out was through the media, and you know, there's always a cost to that.
Okay, same in Colombo?
Not so much. I don't think that impact on the media in terms of the government doing anything, because there's very little to report, actually. The moment COVID started spreading in Europe, the government of Sri Lanka shut the island down. And that was it. Blah, finished. And everyone had to go into quarantine. So as a consequence of which, very little COVID entered the country. The island was insulated as such from people bringing it in, to causing some hardship, I must say. There are workers, Sri Lankan workers in Middle East, who have been unable to come back for some considerable time. It's only now that they're being allowed to come back. But even if they are back here, they have to be quarantined for a month. So the government took extraordinary precautions to stop it coming into the island. So they protected the 23 million people in a very careful and clever way. And as a consequence of which, only the tourism industry suffered greatly because the hotels had no people coming in. But now tourists are coming to the island. They're coming from Russia and Ukraine. I understand in the Maldives, they're coming from the United Kingdom. There's a lot of coming and going happening here, because my son's locked down in London, it's like talking to someone in another planet, the contrast.
I come back to a statement you did earlier, a little bit earlier. You said there is so many opinions and information, which is everybody is declaring either true or false. How should the reader or viewer know what is true and what is false? What evaluation did the expert have? We have thousands of experts from all kinds of fields, starting with virologists, economists, and even if you take the virologists, how different, I was astonished how different their opinions are from virologists to the other virologists. So what the evaluation did the expert have? What do you think? Was it did it really give confidence to the people, or made the people totally unsure because there were contradictory arguments from one virologist to the other ones? So what's happening with science? Maybe a question for Kurt, I don't know. Maybe you can elaborate quickly on your opinion about all these experts which popped up in the media.
Every crisis in the media produces those special experts. You remember 2008 in the financial crisis, the banking and securities experts popped up like mushrooms. And in 2016, the migration experts were flourishing. It's the same outcome this time. It's interesting, virologists like Christian Drosten in Germany or Anthony Fauci in the US became media stars. That's easy to explain. You know, when there are no rock concerts anymore, and no new James Bond film productions anymore. The virologists have to fill the gap. From a journalistic point of view, these masses of experts were a perfect situation, because you could find a virologist or an epidemiologist for every occasion. Whatever your assumption was, whatever your theory or your guesses were, you would find a virologist who would confirm your storyline and your headline. If you want to write a panicking story, no problem. You will easily find an expert who is backing the panic. If you would like to write a more relaxing story about COVID, no problem. You would easily find a specialist who is sending an all-clear signal.
So, but what at the end of the day, what is true, what is false? People is totally not insured anymore. What do you think, Jonathan? We have to, just a short statement because we are soon finished.
Well, insurance is going to be a big issue. It is. I mean, I have a lot of people who put on concerts over in the UK, and it's the issue that will hold them up from getting us returning to normality.
Nerd?
So sorry. I think it is incumbent upon the insurance industry, of which I used to be a practitioner and still am to a certain extent, to provide cover for it rather than the government. They've made a fortune in the last 9 months by people not driving their cars, not using their buildings, not exposing risk to them, and I think they need to pay back.
George, because you brought it up, the subject about true and false information, and I'm wondering, how do you feel?
Very.
Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah.
George?
Jonathan just made a very interesting point about. Jonathan, I just said, made a very interesting point about people making money from the whole situation, because the actual calculations were all thrown out of the window when this happened. Talking about whether we have people have made money, it's the future. We've seen a year of the past and the pretty shambles that we had to face, because it was work in progress. I'm a scientist. I have a scientific background, and so I was taught to learn how to look at statistics and correlation coefficients and things like that. But now today we have this issue, which is quite important to a few people, including the people who got the AstraZeneca vaccine. Today it was reported that 20 or 30 people had this blood clot problem, but 18 million people had the vaccine. Now, is that statistically significant? Is that something one has to get into a big panic about and stop, as the French seem to have done, or the Germans have done? So, at some point, the statistical correlation arguments are thrown out of the window because of some small number of people who have had an adverse whatever. But looking forward, if we have a vaccine passport, which I hope we do, and if we have that passport to allow people to interact and get the economy back into some sounder footing, does it mean that the COVID mutation also stops with the vaccine? And that's the biggest question.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. A question we all cannot answer today, but I think there is so many things to discuss in the future. So I have to conclude finally the session. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your interesting remarks. It was a pleasure to moderate the session. Sorry to cut it here, but I have to. It was a pleasure to moderate the session in such a lively atmosphere. And to all the viewers, we would like obviously to continue this important conversation with you in the months to come. We request you to be in touch with us and follow the various World Forum for Ethics in Business social media properties. You can easily choose them and give your remarks to this. Thank you to our viewers all over the world in 90 countries. We wish you a good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck. Stay happy.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.